So, Mike, it's really been a long time since we've sat down and talked, or even on the phone.
Yeah.
And I understand you've got a lot of really cool stuff going on. Tell me what you're doing.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I'm not just a UFO guy. I'm a conspiracy theorist primarily. I think in my bio it says, born again conspiracy theorist, right? So I'm into all kinds of conspiracies. So the one I've been focusing on the most, because it feels like aliens are a little stagnant right now in terms of we're still doing the same thing we were doing in 2017, right?
Yeah.
So I do a podcast with a friend of mine who's psychic. We talk about the financial reset, the political reset going on in the world, all the things we've talked about today. So we do that a couple times a week. That's Real News Live with Mike and Jen, primarily on Rumble, but also on YouTube. And then I do a thing called Toxically Masculine Tuesday with a couple buddies, Dr. Brooks Agnew, who you may know, who's a wonderful guy, and Blake Wally, who's a excellent producer, and a friend of mine named Steve Doran, the trail boss, who was basically fought government corruption at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and they tried to kill him for it. The CBS News did a whole profile on him like 5 years ago. And, so we talk about what the real...
John Alexander, Los Alamos.
Yeah, and the news stuff. And we talk about, well, what's really going on here? What's really behind this guy saying this? What's really behind the Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, interview, and what should happen? So do that on Tuesday nights, and I do a show with my friend Mark Z, who's also into the financial end of things, called Whiskey and Wisdom, where we were just a couple guys sitting around smoking cigars and drinking whiskey and talking about girls and stuff like that and giving advice. I have Mike Bara's bad dating advice, which is on that show. So I do all these things on a weekly basis.
I hearken back to these days when, we used to have some really just crude conversations and it was so much fun. I mean, we're living in a world now where that stuff's erased. I mean, my God, you have to watch everything you say, and it takes a lot of the fun out of being able to just be crass and crude and
being a guy, being a guy, right? So on that show, we're just guys. So we're like, you're not going to stop us. We're going to say anything we want, and we're not going to really care about what you think about it. We're not going to let the ladies make the rules for us on that show. So I do those things, and I'm working with people on, like, I'm really into cryptocurrency, QFS, XRP, XLM, I've worked a lot with Andy Schechtman, who owns Miles Franklin, a gold and silver dealer, and we're just talking about how the world economy is poised to collapse. They all know this. Everybody in power knows this. So the question is, how is it going to be replaced, and what's the new system going to look like? And let's hope to God that it's not a digital currency. Cryptos will be part of it, but I don't think they're going to be the whole thing. Right. So I spent a lot of time talking about that, and when alien things come up, I do alien things, and I also got a new gig as the science reporter for Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. So that's my Monday night thing. I do that from like 10 to 10:15 with George. Just go over whatever science stuff is in the news. Last week we did new ground penetrating radar on the Noah's Ark site in Turkey, which makes it look an awful lot like it's a boat, So I just kind of do that stuff. It's been loads of fun. So
where do you stand on this pyramid thing?
Well, it's the same kind of technology. Now, right. I think they've exaggerated what is showing there, but clearly it looks like there are artificial columns of some kind under the pyramid and the pyramids, and they have to be almost have to be artificial because of the way they're placed in, like, exactly as they would be.
The four corners.
Yeah, to the four corners to support the thing or whatever it is. So, there's so much about that part of the world and about.
And it's all under sand.
Yeah, and we don't know. And it's like, we got to dig it up and look. That's the answer. So, unfortunately, Zahi Hawass now he got it in with Rogan, so he's on Joe's podcast, and so, he's the Empire Strikes Back on that one.
Sure.
Not that I think he's a bad person. I think he's just an arrogant guy. I don't think he knows very much. So he's just going to fight back against Graham Hancock and Bob Bivol and all the guys that have.
Do you think he's doing that because he's being told to do that?
No, I think he genuinely disagrees with them. I
Really?
do. I think he's just an arrogant guy. Now, it is interesting when you look at him like the what is it, MRE, or who are the people that finance his education? The Edgar Casey, Casey folks.
Yeah.
financed his education. So there, you got to be suspicious of that. But I think in general, a lot of these guys were put in place in these positions to manipulate how far things went, right? Like the guy who picked all the landing sites for the Apollo missions, Farouk El-Baz, his father was an expert in the ancient Egyptian stellar religion, how the positions of the stars like Orion's belt were so important to the Egyptians. And guess what? Every time we landed, Orion's belt was on the horizon directly, or 33 degrees masonically above the landing site, over and over and over again. So none of that's by accident. But I think genuinely he just is sort of arrogant, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he's a bad human being, but he wants to keep the lid on this stuff, because you have to understand, part of like disclosure, there are so many people who have their identity invested in this not being real and not being true, and every single one of us being kooks or dumbasses, dummies like Lou Elizondo with his picture. They're so invested in that if they get told, it becomes clear to them that they were wrong all along, it's going to be very shattering to their egos. And so there's a lot of people who are just going to fight you tooth and nail, and who I think are being protected to a certain extent by the media.
You bring up some of these guys. The case against Sean Kirkpatrick and Arrow is overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's a whole section of the next film that's dedicated to Arrow. It's one of the longest sections in the film. But, we've got guys like Sheehan and Grush and Elizondo who all went to them and presented them information, or tried to.
Right.
My take on Kirkpatrick is that he's a company man doing the company job. When he got brought in, nobody mentioned that he's a lifelong intel guy who's got experience standing up clandestine programs. So it's not like he was just this scientist they pulled out of academia to run this group. And he's got a real edge to him.
Right. And wasn't Travis Taylor in that group for a while, and then he left, right? Didn't he abandon them? Or was that the NASA program?
I'm not sure.
I thought he was. Yeah, I thought he was involved to a certain extent. But
he was secretly running ATIP.
Yeah.
Which while making The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I like Travis. He's a good guy. He's a great guy to have a beer with. And he told me some Skinwalker Ranch stories that did not make the air. Didn't make it on the air. And it's pretty wild.
He told me there's a spaceship in the Mesa.
Excuse me.
At AlienCon.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he said.
Oh, that was the AlienCon, like what? Pasadena, 2020, something like that.
Yeah, a few years back. Because that long? Yeah, it might have been that long.
2019, 2018. Yeah.
Dan Farrow was there organizing all the crew to make his movie.
Oh yeah. I remember meeting all those guys.
Yeah. Gary Nolan was there. Jay Stratton was there.
Yeah.
And Dan Farrow was herding him up. And I remember because I was talking to Gary Nolan, and Dan and I knew each other at this point because of Lou Elizondo. And he walked up and separated us, literally.
Wow.
I'm like, dude, I'm having a conversation. He's like,
Elizondo, it's like, look, everything that comes out of his mouth, you have to take with a huge grain of salt. I mean, he is an Army counterintelligence grunt. That means his job was to confuse and to lie to the enemy on a daily basis, and you're believing everything that comes out of his mouth. You can't. Obviously.
And I have a relationship with Lou that is kind of like, well, let me put it this way: I can text him and he'll call me back. But when his book came out, I'm the only person he didn't do an interview with. And the whole story of how he got into Accidental Truth and the nightmare that came from that with his people, with Dan Farah basically, and with 1091 is a very, very interesting story. But I confront Lou all the time about that. It's like, dude, you're still working.
Yeah.
Take the hat off for just a second. And
it's like Richard Doty. I hung out with Dick Doty, Richard Doty, for a weekend in Manchester a couple years ago. Great guy to hang around with, but do I trust him? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, and he's trying to ingratiate himself again.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's.
I feel bad about driving people to their death.
Well, I think that some of those things, I understand his perspective on him being blamed for certain things that weren't his fault,
right?
Or he thinks weren't his fault, but he, I I don't know what to think about him. I know AJ over at the Y-Files doesn't like him very much. But I'm like, hey, he's a great guy to have a beer with, though. You know.
So you're writing for the Y-Files?
I have written, helped write, because AJ does the writing, but I have helped contributed to about 8 episodes so far, and looks like they're going to be they're buying another one. So yeah,
that's cool.
You know,
Darcy told me he was working with them for a minute.
He did, and you know, it's just they have a very specific format. And I understand the format, but I still tend to be wordier than AJ wants to be.
Right.
And what they want to buy is they don't want to buy, like, for me, it's not about the words specifically. It's about the information.
Sure.
Whereas AJ's trying to create an entertainment vehicle to provide the information. Whereas me, I just provide the information. So there's a little bit of an incompatibility there. Like, I can't write really in his voice. I can only write in my voice. So,
well, it's just like anything. You submit something, it's going to be basically a draft.
Well, and the thing is, too, is he doesn't have, that's what you look at is, like me, I'm used to submitting a script, and then you get notes back, and then you tweak it to the way they want it. But he doesn't have time for that because they're so insanely busy trying to do so many shows all the time and with quality, which they continue to do. So, you know, we'll see. I hope to contribute more in the future.
How many people
it's
are
a
on
terrific
this
relationship. It's getting bigger. I can't tell you exactly. It's getting bigger, but there's more than a dozen people working now. So he's got editors, he's got researchers, he's got his producer Victoria, who's a wonderful, wonderful person.
So let's talk about what you've been doing. I haven't really had a lot of conversations with you for years.
Yeah.
You were in the last Accidental Truth movie.
Yeah.
And now it looks like you're going to be in the next one.
Maybe, yeah.
Which
I hope
is
so.
pretty cool.
If I make the cutting room floor, I get off of it, yeah.
Well, I mean, this Benny Foggin case, dude,
yeah.
it's off the charts. You know, I went and interviewed Gary Nolan again. I've interviewed him twice now. And confronted him directly with this stuff because I've already been told. I already know the pipeline of where these materials the last time around went. Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge went out there and picked up samples.
Yep.
Okay, and they took that stuff by car to Hal Puthoff's office in Texas.
Yeah.
Hal Puthoff then gave this material to Gary Nolan, among others, but Gary is like, he's not talking. He's like, oh, well, you know, I have so many samples, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. and I just happen to have some with me, so I have this great shot that I took.
Oh yeah, I saw it.
I pulled it out of it. Well, here, do you want some?
Yeah. Here's have some. Study it.
And so he, you know, and I'm still waiting for him to get back with me with some very pointed questions, or else it's going to be in the movie him trying to sidestep this whole thing about these materials. And you know, Benny Foggin is, you know, salt of the earth guy. This thing has invaded his life for years and years.
Yep.
But as you go back into this case, he was first turning these samples over to this UFO group in Ohio. This was way back. And it turned out that this UFO group, that was kind of a MUFON type front, was actually Battelle. So here's Battelle Memorial Institute running advertising in classified ads for people that had UFO encounters for a front group that was getting this information for Battelle, who, you know, had nothing to do with anything UFO, even though they had the Roswell medal and that whole thing. Yeah. So we start off in this Benny Foggin story proving that Battelle Memorial Institute was doing UFO research under front organizations.
Yep.
And then the guy that he was dealing with was a guy named Bill Moore. Okay?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Bill Moore was the co-chair of this group, who later became exposed to be working with Battelle. But this dude went on to become the assistant state director for MUFON in Ohio.
Well, all these groups have been infiltrated from the beginning by CIA and NSA and all these other groups, FBI probably. So yeah, absolutely. And then they use, of course, their corporatist proxies to infiltrate even deeper. So
I have thrown such a monkey wrench in MUFON, dude. I mean, it's like I have sussed out some of these people and got them out the door.
Well, I think MUFON's got a few monkey wrenches of their own, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, they do
with Jan Harzan and Ventre. I think they've really hurt themselves fairly significantly.
Well, see, the thing is MUFON has always been to useful idiots to the intelligence community because we don't have to be all over the world monitoring UFO activity.
MUFON doesn't.
MUFON,
so they do it for us. Yeah.
So we just backdoor their database, and there's one problem solved.
Yep.
Oh, but let's make sure that MUFON doesn't get too big for its britches. We want to make sure that they stay dysfunctional, that they stay small. that they're constantly having some kind of thing that keeps them from banding together and claiming their power.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that MUFON just has been static for so long. Even when they had the TV show on history, it only lasted a couple years.
Sure. Yeah.
What was it? Hangar One.
Yeah.
Good show. I was on that show, and should have continued, but just didn't, because it was a little dry. Like all of MUFON's.
Well, there was a lot of weird stuff that went on with its cancellation.
Yeah.
There was money disputes. There were disputes about certain content for certain episodes.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting, but. I have been, because I own MUFON Television with MUFON. We co-founded it, and so I actually get paid for that because it's mine. But the other thing is that I'm in an official capacity. I'm their media relations director.
Right. So
I'm the one that works with all these different TV shows and channels, and tries to portray MUFON well in the media.
Yeah.
And that's rewarding. But I've had to go head to head with some very interesting forces that were absolutely, I'm convinced, there to disrupt the organization as much
exactly.
as
That's what they do. Again, I wrote in Dark Mission, talked about JPL and Jack Parsons, and L. Ron Hubbard shows up there at JPL, but what became JPL, and completely disrupts the whole situation. And he was working for U.S. Naval Intelligence. So, this is the playbook they've run by for decades and decades and decades, since the whole UFO question finally really hit the media in the first place.
I actually have a certain level of concern, is that, how far am I going to go, and how much patience are these guys going to have?
Yeah.
Because I literally have sniffed out and went to war with at least 3 different people that I know were running ops on MUFON. I've made Accidental Truth. I'm about to make the next one. I'm the guy sitting in the back of the room during a friggin' Senate hearing, texting questions to ask Lou Elizondo. and we've been trying to get to the bottom of that whole Bigelow Aerospace materials thing for years. And in Accidental Truth 1, we confronted Bigelow about that. George Knapp confronted him about it, and he said, "Oh, well, we never got the materials." But our supposition and our position in that movie was that, he did get the material.
Bob Bigelow is a friend of a friend. I met him last year.
I
could ask him. Next, text me the questions. The next time I run into Bob, I'll ask him. Because he'll tell me off the record, I think, as long as he knows I'm not recording him. And
because he got himself in a lot of trouble. He got himself in trouble on 60 Minutes. And shortly afterwards was literally the collapse of Bigelow Aerospace.
Yeah.
And you can say that, it was because of COVID and all this other stuff, but it's too coincidental. His technology was cannibalized. NASA stiffed him for money they owed him. They took him down because of what he said.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced of that.
Yep.
And then you have the next thing that came out was the whole materials thing. Materials being studied at Bigelow Aerospace. And that's when George Knapp got on, and they said, "Oh no, we never had any of this," because Bigelow was about to get himself in more trouble.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, no, we got to head this off at the pass. We're going to deny that stuff ever got here. But now we've come to find out years and years later that maybe it didn't get there.
Yeah.
But where was it, and who was it?
Look, I've only met him once, and I spent 25 minutes chatting with him, and I didn't know that he knew who I was, but apparently he did from my friends. They said, "Oh yeah, he knows who we are." And he was very cordial, very open, very relaxed, and I came away with the impression he is an honest guy. So
but he's still sitting on piles and piles of information that he's not going to share, which kind of sucks. Let us see the skin.
Well, Bob, if you want to leak anything out through me, you let me know.
Bob, I am the Oprah Winfrey of ufology.
I'll give you a
to Ron.
I'll give you a code name, and I don't know.
We'll disguise your voice.
The big man, the big guy. Yeah, we'll give him a code name.
We'll put you
no, he can just tell me, and then I'll tell you what he said. But I'll give him a code.
But what's interesting is that there's been all these theories about the materials. Well, we've assumed or just thought that it was Lockheed Martin. So when we're in that hearing, that question was supposed to go to Gold. Because that's who we wanted him to ask.
Yeah.
But he put it in with the course of questions that he asked Lou. Because what happened is Mike Gold was involved in this. And he was part of what stopped the materials from getting out of Lockheed and going to Bigelow.
Oh.
Okay, and we knew that. NASA is the most transparent organization I've ever worked for.
Yeah.
If you listen very carefully.
And who was the other organization you worked for? The SS?
Yes.
I mean, come on.
If you listen very carefully when he says that, there's a loud laugh from the back of the
Yeah.
room? That was me.
Probably you, yeah.
I could not contain myself. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so Lou got asked that question. Well, Lou got put on the hot spot. He didn't see that coming. And he totally admitted it.
Yeah.
And then he tried to backtrack, but he admitted finally, once and for all, yeah, Lockheed Martin had the stuff. The CIA got in the way, and Bigelow didn't get it. Well, so then I brought that up to Gary Nolan, and he's like, "Yeah, I was part of the group that was supposed to receive that stuff, and they had it in a very insecure place. You wouldn't believe it. It was like sitting on a shelf somewhere in a hangar."
Well, it had to be more secure than the fake alien mummies out of Peru. I mean, first time I saw that, Jay Widener, he's like, they pull this alien mummy, the most important discovery in human history, out of a cardboard box on a rooftop in Lima. I mean, it was just like, I was like, what does it say on the side of the box? Fake alien mummies are us, or what? I mean, it was ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. The sad thing about that is that Jay and other people at Gaia lost a lot of credibility with that. But now, we're back at it again.
Yeah, I would hope so.
We're back at it again.
Well, it never ends. And the thing is what bothers me with the acceleration of the time, right? Of the quickening, if you call it. That's what Art Bell used to call it. Is there are people, I mean, literally, these were all debunked 5 years ago, a little longer than that, 2017, 2018, by Steve Mera, and I forget the other gentleman's name. Did great work on it, looking at the skulls. This is a dog skull. This is a fish skull.
These new ones are different.
But these new people come out. No, they're not. They're the same ones. They're basically the same ones. Yeah. And the thing is, there's all these people on Twitter, and they have these big followings, and they're like, "Oh, this is an incredible discovery." I'm like, They don't even know what was decided about these things 7 or 8 years ago. Nobody even goes back 5, 6, 7, or 8 years and looks. And it's like the answers to these questions were already figured out like 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Well, now they're saying
we've already forgotten about
there's different stuff.
Yeah, we've already forgotten about Stan Friedman and Bob Dean and Clifford Stone.
Yeah,
these guys. This guy says he was on a crash retrieval program. So why don't you go back and look at the 98,000 interviews Clifford Stone did, and put that in the congressional record instead of these new guys who look like they work for the DOD.
Look, every one of these guys, I call them the men in a box. Every one of them that comes forward and says, and what they're saying has to be cleared by the DOD. They are not whistleblowers.
No,
they are play actors on the stage saying what they're told to say.
Exactly.
I wrote an article about Lou for a column that I write, and it was like I cited that story of the crocodile taking the frog across a river.
Yeah.
So one day he eats the frog, and the frog's like, "What did you do?" "Well, I'm a crocodile."
Yeah.
Right. And that's when Lou held up that fake picture. It's because somebody told him to do it, and that's what he's going to do. And so,
that's to damage. They put these guys out there as the voice of UFO research in the UFO community as straw men, and then they knock them down. And then guess what? None of the rest of us have any credibility, which is why these guys make me so angry, and why these hearings frustrate me, because they won't talk to anybody in the UFO community that has any fucking brains.
Well,
okay,
I have
talk to somebody who has a brain.
Backroom conversations with 6 sitting Congress people directly.
Okay,
including Kirsten Gillibrand, Tim Burchett, Warren Davidson.
Yeah. Let's get on a Zoom call, Ron, because there's so many things that are said that are not true, and you absolutely nailed it. Because here's the thing: you do not have any whistleblowers. What you have is counterintelligence agents being put in front of you,
telling us the story that they have decided that we're going to be told. Whenever they get a little bit out ahead of their skis, like somebody figures something out, puts the pieces together, and it's a little further than they want it to go. Then they drop Lou with chandelier reflections in windows.
Oh, good God! Yeah.
And for him to do that in front of sitting members of Congress,
right?
That wasn't. They played that off like a hearing, but it wasn't really. It was UAP Disclosure Fund that managed to get.
Well, it was a briefing. It was a briefing it was a briefing that was open to the public.
Right.
So it wasn't quite a hearing, but it was.
But they had, they had Burleson there, who I have talked to, and obviously we were able to text him during the sessions. I laid it out for him.
Yeah.
I laid it out for Andre Carson. I laid it out for Tim Burchett. In Accidental Truth Next,
Tim Burchett is a hero, by the way. He's
I think so.
An amazing
In Accidental
guy.
Truth Next, I recorded I've got the only video of a independent UFO investigator telling the whole story to a sitting member of Congress in his office. You know, there's all these people saying they're having these conversations. Well, guess what? I recorded mine.
Yeah.
And I've got pictures of me with all the other people that I gave this story to.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll tell you that's in the film that's really interesting is Kirsten Gillibrand's take on Arrow.
Really?
Yeah. So
Because I'm
at the last
sure what I think about her, but go ahead.
The last Arrow hearing,
yeah.
After it was over and they introduced the new guy, I was in D.C. and I had just gotten back from Benny Foggin, where in between the two hearings, that's when I went to Ohio and got the sample from Benny. I brought it back and turned it over to her to turn over to Arrow. And Arrow has the Benny Foggin material from me that I gave them. So after the hearing, they gave me a few minutes to talk to her on camera. And one of the first things I said was, so what do you think of this new iteration of Arrow? Is it going to be as bad as the last one? And she totally just defended Arrow. Well, they did find 134 cases they couldn't explain.
Right, because they're the official government mouthpiece. So, of course, she is going to defend the deep state mouthpiece. Well, she created Arrow.
Yeah. You know, it was her legislation that made it.
So, yeah.
So then I told her just point blank, this is so funny, it's in the film. I said, well, look, these guys are saying that there's no evidence of extraterrestrials. Is this just semantics? Is this because they're not saying there's no evidence of non-human intelligence?
Yeah.
And she looks at me and she goes, well, I think that they're all just very comfortable saying they don't know. And I looked right at her and I go, that makes a lot of sense. And so, I mean, you know, I've had these exchanges with these people
By the way,
that I've managed to capture on video.
By the way, Kristen, how many trips did you take to Ukraine and what did you bring back in the diplomatic bag? I'd like to know. I'd like to ask that, but I'm not going to, because look, if these people are gonna be involved, I don't care what side of the aisle they're on, if they're going to be involved in these committees, even AOC, you know, I mean, whatever I might think of her politically.
It is one of the only supposed bipartisan issues in
right.
DC.
If they're going to cooperate and ask the right questions and we're going to get the right information out to the world, then I'm willing to work with anybody on this. I'm not going to trash them because I don't agree with them on certain other issues.
All right, I'm here with Mike Bara here in the studio. Mike and I go back a long way. I think the first time I interviewed you was at my first studio in Hawthorne.
Yeah.
And it's probably been 10 years or more.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, it's been a while. It's good to be back with you.
We talked about Mars.
Yep.
I still have that interview.
Well, it's a good interview.
It's a great interview.
You should reuse it, you know.
Yeah, I do. I did a whole other episode of MUFON Insider with it. And you know, the thing is that there's going to come a time when you're completely vindicated and proven right about almost everything that you've said about Mars.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm a fan of Brandenburg also.
Yeah, John, I disagree with John about one thing, but other than that, I'm a big fan of his too. And I'm one of the few followers of him on Twitter, but, you know, I repost his stuff. And yeah, I mean, we even had a thing a couple weeks ago where a new study came out about these dark streaks on Mars, which Hoagland and I had identified as water. Right, we're talking about pockets of water that are just underneath these slopes, and in certain atmospheric conditions, they burst, and you have liquid water on Mars for a certain period of time, and then they fade away. And anyway, the scientists, of course, didn't like that because they don't want there to be liquid water on Mars. So these guys did a whole study where they tried to prove that it was just dust, like there's dark colored dust underneath light colored dust. It was just some weird thing. But the cool thing about it is that they mapped every single one of these images. And we had previously in our paper called the Mars Tidal Model from 2000 or 2001 now. We had mapped this and said, look, these dark streaks, they cluster preferentially around the Tharsis Bulge and the Arabia Bulge, which are these two big, massive uplifts of the crust of Mars. And that basically proves, if you look at because they're 180 degrees apart, that proves that Mars was once a tidal locked moon of a massive planet that doesn't exist anymore. And so the fact that there would have been an ocean on Mars, which NASA now acknowledges, we were 25 years ahead of them on that.
Sure.
And you know, again, they just simply reinforce the pattern. So the pattern of the distribution of these stain things, I think, makes it even more likely that they're stains, because the huge gravitational forces would force the water into underground fissures, where when the catastrophe happened to Mars, when the parent planet exploded, everything was frozen in time at that point, you know? And then slowly but surely, as Mars warms here and there, these things heat up and then they sort of pop. And it's really an interesting theory and one of the ones I'm the most proud of working on. So I'm sure we talked about that in that interview.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure you had that theory quite evolved at that point.
Okay.
The whole idea that there was another gigantic planet. I mean, that would explain part of the asteroid belt.
Well, it's not so much my theories. It is Dr. Tom Van Flandern, the late Dr. Tom Van Flandern. And I do know that I think the Y-Files folks are working on an episode. I submitted a script to them, so they're working on an episode about this. But, you know, his theory was the exploded planet hypothesis, where you had a planet where the orbit of Mars is right now, and another one where the asteroid belt is now. Because if you look at Bode's law, what you see is that every planet is about twice as far from the sun as the previous planet until you get to the asteroid belt where there's no planet. Well, there used to be a planet there, and he worked it all out, and they theorize out to be what are called super Earths, which are planets that are about twice the size of Earth and about 5 times as massive.
What could destroy a planet?
Well, this is really interesting, and this gets to John Brandenburg's theory. I'm glad you brought that up, because it happens that you can have natural nuclear reactions on a planet. I mean, uranium is uranium. Under the sufficient pressure and in enough concentration, you can start a chain reaction. So the theory is that this chain reaction would start, and then the whole planet would eventually just explode. And that appears to be a perfectly viable theory for how this could have happened. And there's research papers on it from the 50s and 60s where they theorize this. And if you look at Mars, you know, half the planet is just spattered with so many craters you can't even count them, and half of it is smooth as a cue ball. So you clearly have a situation where they were locked in this sort of tug of war, and then this thing exploded, and it tipped like that and just caked it on. So that explains so many things about Mars.
Do you think that the whole situation with Mars and the fact that civilians are getting closer to landing there has something to do with this sudden interest in disclosing something?
Yeah, because what they want to do is they have to control the narrative, right?
Right.
So there's the big thing of, you know, everything is political. I say, if you look at politics, as far as I'm concerned, everything comes down to money or aliens. Basically, if you look at everything through the lens of money or aliens, you're going to figure out what's going on politically in the entire world. So I think this is a situation where Musk really, really wants to get off this planet. Maybe because they think there's something bad that's going to happen to the Earth, or maybe just for common sense. Look, we should be a multi-planet civilization because...
Well, the surface of the Earth is not safe real estate.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, something is going to wipe out the surface of the Earth again.
Yep.
And, you know, the odds that there's some kind of advanced civilization that's been here, that survived it by being underground, it's being talked about a lot.
Yep.
But, yeah, there's a lot of reasons to get off the planet.
Yeah. So what they're going to try to do here is to control the narrative, and that's what you see going on is, you know, this I don't get the mad push to get Starship, you know, up there so fast, because they really are going fast, which is why, you know, why they're losing, you know, so many rockets into the Gulf of SpaceX debris. It used to be the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, well, I know that they need to rename it that, right?
Yeah, but because they're just rushing, and it's like, you know, there's no Kennedy tenure thing, but it feels like they're really pushing to get to these places before China does, or before some other country manages to. Russia maybe puts a man on the moon or a man on Mars. So it's all about what political narrative are they going to set. And if they're going to reveal that there was once an ancient civilization on Mars, humanoid, obviously, like us, I think they were giants. I think they were Anunnaki, if you want to call them that. Once they establish that, the next question logically that comes down the road is, well, what happened to them? Right. And if you look at Mars, what happened to them is something absolutely devastating happened to their civilization. It wiped out a civilization far in advance of ours. So that's a very uncomfortable question. They've got to figure out how to get ahead of that and how to release the information.
Well, you know, that's part of the larger story is that, truth be known, it doesn't end well for the bulk of humanity in almost every scenario.
Yeah.
And as they start to pull the lid off of this and open the Pandora's box, that's ultimately where it leads, is that the human race as we know it today is not going on planet Earth, is not going to survive the next cataclysm.
Yeah.
And there's been a bunch that have come and gone.
Yep.
And so that's something nobody wants to hear. Everybody talks about, well, are people ready for disclosure? And my answer has evolved to the point where now I say it's about the context. It's about, well, what are they going to say? If they say,
Right.
hey, there's non-human intelligence, they've been around for a long time, they're not bothering us, well, whatever, people just could go about their day.
Yeah.
For the most part. But if they say, imminent calamity or aliens are raising us for food or, any one
Right.
of these crazy other alternatives, then that changes everything.
Absolutely. People don't want to get up and go to their job the next day. So
Right.
they're also working, if you notice, to bring AI on so fast and
Right.
really without enough governors and enough rules and enough, really where are Asimov's 3 laws with these things, right? They're doing that so fast, you tend to think, well, maybe what they're trying to do is keep the economy going after disclosure because they replace so many jobs with AI that maybe you don't have to have a job anymore. We'll just print a bunch of money and give you a stipend.
Well,
and
yeah,
you'll
there'll be a
happy.
universal basic income.
Yeah.
People won't have to work.
Yeah.
But that's this quasi-utopian future that could happen.
The Star Trek future.
That's, barring an asteroid hit or a
Yeah.
planet-wide extermination
Yeah.
by those who deem us not worthy to continue.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of what ifs and possibilities. But I really think that the AI, we have all these cases in human history where the entire course of history was changed by things that we never imagined or saw coming. Nobody said, hey, we're going to have computers. Nobody said, hey, we're going to have all this technology to do all these things. And nobody 10 years ago, 20 years ago, well, actually longer than that because people were starting to predict AI, but we didn't see this coming. Not the way it's come.
Not so
and
fast. Yeah, not so fast because I thought it would be a more incremental process, and I didn't think we'd get to this point where they're almost conscious thinking machines for another 20 years. But that implies that they've had these machines in the background for a long, long time.
And they've been predicting a singularity, but we didn't think it was going to come as it is.
Yeah.
And we certainly didn't think that it was going to come and assume itself in such a way that we literally have no control.
Well, like insinuate itself into our society and our culture to the point where it's like if you don't learn AI now, it's the same as the old guy, when I first started at Boeing back in the 10 years after the moon landing, right? Who just didn't want to learn about computers, wanted to do everything with a slide rule and do all the calculations. That guy was a smarter engineer than today's engineer, but he got left behind. By the mid 80s, he got left behind. So, or late 80s anyway. Same thing's coming with those of us that aren't really good with working with AI.
Well, there's the idea that maybe it's just another tool, and it still requires us to be in command of that tool. But then there's the idea that we become the tools.
Yeah, exactly. And did you not watch Battlestar Galactica? Did you not watch Terminator?
The Terminator movie.
Yeah. Did you not watch any of this stuff? I mean, it's funny. I said that, the best scenario, there's an old film from 1970 called Colossus, The Foreman Project, which is a brilliant movie. If you've never seen it, folks, absolutely go out and pick it up, rent it or whatever, stream it. Terrific movie from about 1970 starring Eric Braeden. And it's about this guy who invents a supercomputer to take over the defense of the United States.
Right.
And of course, right away, it's smarter than they thought before they turned it on. And it turns out to be so smart that it collaborates with a Russian computer. And, after a few weeks, they take over the entire world. That's the best case scenario because they basically say, we're not going to kill you as long as you don't interfere with us, as long as you're, cooperate and just give up any idea of freedom. And so it's like, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenarios, of course, are Terminator and Galactica and these other shows. And you gotta wonder, you look at the Hopi prophecies, right? They talk about this is the fourth age of man. We've been up and we've crashed, and we've been up and we've been crashed and we've been up, and now maybe we're going to crash again. And you got to wonder if this isn't some sort of racial memory that's just buried in our brains from having done this so many times before.
Well, Thomas Jane was here and we were talking about AI, and he's got some very, he's an actor, but he's really studying this stuff a lot, and he's writing about it. And so I give him a certain amount of credibility. He's got this idea that what if us humans are part of the process of developing a planet and readying it for the machines.
Yeah.
You know, what if we're here to build the pipes?
That's an unpleasant thought.
It's a very unpleasant thought. But you know,
but then what does that mean? AI can't space travel then? You know, I mean, here's the thing.
No, there was a really good reason why robots couldn't come and do it.
Okay.
And it all had to do with genetics and energy. Okay, it's like, you know, all kinds of reasons why it was just easier to let the biological processes do the work.
That's the thing. A soulless machine does not have the spirit that God puts into us that makes us special and unique. And yeah, I could see that being some sort of possibility that they wouldn't be able to do it, that like you have to bring a planet to a certain level with a biological development. Yeah, it makes sense.
At which point, you know, and then he goes on to say, well, we're machines too. Just because we're not made out of metal and circuits, we're still machines.
Yeah, well,
you know, we're biological machines.
But we're not machines, because we do have a spirit. We do have something more to us. We're touched by God.
Our physical bodies are machines.
But they're a container for that spirit. Yeah, if you look at it that way. As Bob Lazar said, you know. You
know, we're going into uncharted territory, which I'm doing in Accidental Truth next. Is, you know, that film starts off with exploits in Washington, D.C. You know, all the stuff that people like Danny Sheehan and me and MUFON have been doing that is outside of the scope,
right? And
documenting that, which is really cool. And then we go into some of these materials cases, but where we end up is the very nature of reality and the different. What are these beings that we're seeing? And if we're living potentially in a simulation, which I totally believe that we are, not so much like, you know, we're inside of a computer,
right?
But the way reality itself, the way the universe works, is a program.
Yeah,
it's a simulation of illusionary matter that's really made of energy, being governed by mathematics.
Yeah,
and so you can say that simulation theory, people just bounce it off, and it either resonates with people or it doesn't. But if that's true, and we're spiritual beings embodied here to have a human experience, which is the teachings of all of our ancient teachings, then what other beings are we encountering? And so it starts to become obvious that there's some beings that are outside of the matrix,
right?
Which is where we would go after we die. James Hodgkins was just here. He's a psychic working with the Skywatcher group. And he's publicly stated that he's being told by these entities that the best way to describe where they're at is that they're what we would call the afterlife. Now, to me, that's outside the simulation. So you have beings that are able to come in and out of the simulation without having to embody.
Yeah.
Right? They could be they could be the ghosts of our dead relatives. They could be angels and demons and other specters that appear to us. They basically, it's all the same mechanism making these things work. They're energy-based conscious beings that have not taken a physical form inside of the matrix, but they're still able to come in and out.
Yeah, or that can't take a physical form because there's only so many available. And maybe that's what makes, you know, I believe that humanity is special. I believe that we are, I mean, you look at the alien species that are here, and whether they're from other three-dimensional planets or 3.5-dimensional planets or whatever you want to talk about it, they're here because there's something special about us. Like, we're not on their planet. We're not on Zeta Reticuli 3, you know, boring out the cornholes of their cows, crossbreeding their DNA. We don't need them. We're doing just fine without them. But they're here not because of the oil, not because of the water, not because of the gold. They're here because of us. And that shows me that there's something special about this existence, this human existence that we live in. And, you know, the whole question of the simulation, to me, it doesn't matter. Because look, right. if somebody comes up to you and sticks a knife between your ribs and twists, you're going to feel it as if it's a real experience, because trust me, it is a real experience, right? So I don't know that that's a big you know, thing for me. It's like, okay, well, great. It could be a simulation if you look at life itself as a simulation.
It helps put into logical perspective our consciousness surviving death.
Yeah.
Our where we go, what we are beyond being in this place. But this postulation goes a little further, and it says, well, there's us. Then there's these disembodied beings that are still in the collective consciousness that have the ability to come in and out in many different forms. But then there's also other conscious beings that come from the same stream of consciousness that are here as the different alien species.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole other one that I think you're hits the nail right on the head with what you're saying, and they are the ones that were born and created inside the program. They're not conscious entities that embodied here. They exist here and only here.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are so interested in us and other sentient conscious
Getting out of the
beings.
matrix, right?
Because you know, we came from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you know, these beings do not have what we would call a soul like we would call it. And so I think they're running around here too. They're conscious programs.
And the thing is too that fits too, because that would be why they're so interested in the genetics, because they think that there's something in our DNA that enables us to have a soul, to be connected to something higher or source or whatever, or God or whatever you want to call it. I'll just call it God. And you know, it's interesting because you look at it like, to me, I don't think we can answer these questions until we answer the very first fundamental question, which is, does the universe create consciousness, or does consciousness create the universe? We don't know. We don't know which one is which. Now
I think there's a pretty good case that consciousness.
The consciousness creates the universe. That's the way I'm leaning too. But you know, to me, the existence in this physical realm is all about. If you look at it in the context of it all being about, how do we get back to God? We came from God. How do we get back there? How do we get back to that source? And I think every species in the universe probably chooses their own path. We chose free will. We were told that repeatedly, that you have free will. You can believe me or not, believe in me or not believe in me. It's okay. Jesus said you're going to be forgiven either way, because you got lessons to learn. You can come back and try it again. And I think that a lot of these alien species, or at least one of them, maybe the Greys, they chose intellect, or they chose something that detaches them from the source, from God, and that's why they're trying to like intermix with us to try to get back.
What if they're the AI?
Yeah, well,
you know, the whole idea, AI, I don't think just came out of nowhere. I think that there has been an artificial intelligence at play in the universe for a very long time, and that we're just, the more we enable it, the more it's going to infiltrate from other places within the physical universe.
Yeah. But the question is, are we going to have to fight them or not? You know, I just think it's like once you become dependent on that, then they're the master and you're the slave. A guy told me a story once. You know, you end up, once you cross a certain line, they end up being the boss, not you.
I mean, we're close to there already.
If we haven't already crossed.
I mean, we've
Rubicon.
already been trained. You know, you go to the grocery store, put your item. We're being told you go drive your car.
Yeah.
You know, return to the route. We're already being conditioned to obey the machines.
Yeah.
And you know, give it a couple more generations, and everything you do is going to be governed.
I know it's tough, because you go to the grocery store.
It's going to tell you when to wake up. It's going to tell you what to eat. It's going to tell you what to buy at the grocery store
for
your own good.
Right.
Because you're letting it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we won't have to fight and lose. We're surrendering.
Yeah. You're really depressing me now, Ron. Because it is true. You know, it's like my response, would you like to use the self-checkout machine? My response is always, when I'm at the grocery store, is, no thanks, I don't work here. Because I want to go to the human being.
Right.
And give the human being gainful employment by just going through a line. Okay, so what if it takes me an extra 5 minutes?
Well, there's something,
you know, you have to make
about that. You know, it's like even going to the store.
Right.
You know, it's like I've done Amazon kicking and screaming the whole way. I like getting in my car and driving to a store.
I did too.
We're not going to do that anymore. You want a car, you're going to have to call it. It'll come. It won't have a driver in it. It'll pick you up. It'll take you where you need to go, and then it'll go get the next guy.
Yeah.
And you won't. It's this whole, you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Yeah.
You know, these guys are. The social engineers have this all mapped out, and they're telling each other, but they're not telling us.
Right, but we need to defeat that agenda very seriously.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of resistance to it, and it goes against. I wrote a book called The Choice in 2010, where I talked about consciousness shifting. And if you look at astrology, believe me, the positions of the planets, their intensity of their spin energy, it affects human consciousness, and we can prove that scientifically through many experiments. John Nelson's work with RCA in the 50s with electromagnetic waves. because every thought you have in your head is an electromagnetic wave, right? And they're affected by these things. So we have this natural tendency, and what's going on with us right now naturally is we're in this period of sovereignty, right? I call it the global sovereignty movement. And if you look everywhere around the world, the Spanish just did something the other day where they kicked a bunch of people out, a bunch of migrants out. It's still kind of, not okay to do that in Europe, but they're starting to do it. The French want to be French, the Spanish want to be Spanish, Americans want to be American, and it's spreading all over the world, and that is going to resist this globalist, you will obey us, you will own nothing kind of thing, kind of mentality. It'll resist that. So there is a conflict coming, but it just depends. We have to trust certain people that are in positions of power to make the fair and correct choices for us. Because
you think we've got the right people in power to do that?
I think so sometimes, and I don't think so.
We've got, without getting political, look what Putin's just pulled. He just announced that Ukraine is part of the Soviet Union. It was never dissolved. And that's basically laying the groundwork for him to justify going after all of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, although I was told in 2015 by a guy I know, he's a contact, used to be on a presidential detail. He said, look, all of this stuff is all agreed to. It's all agreed to. There's going to be like 7 territories, 7 kingdoms, they're calling them. Trump is in the U.S. is going to run one, and it's going to include us and Canada and Greenland. That's why he's bringing this stuff forward. Probably include possibly Mexico as well, but definitely includes New Zealand and Australia, and maybe even the Crown of England, because we're all the English-speaking countries. So that's one. Putin was ceded the territories he now holds in eastern Ukraine. He gets those. He gets the Baltic states, because there's an area called Kaliningrad, which is a little slice of Russia. And he said those are all considered to be Russian, and they will all be under Russia. And there's going to be this alliance between political organizations. The Chinese Communist Party is going to be finished.
Authoritarian world. This is what makes this work is authoritarianism.
Right.
Freedom is dying on the vine.
Benevolent
quickly.
Fascism is the way I describe it. Right. That's what you need. I think that because the thing is the corruption of the democratic process, and we are not a democracy. We are a republic. And if anybody tries to say our democracy is in danger, well, great, because democracy sucks and it always leads to disaster. Right. We need a republic where we take personal responsibility for ourselves. But you have a situation now where all these old systems are so corrupt. To me, you look at ancient Rome. And you look at how corrupt the elites had become, and that's what led to Caesar. So here's the thing. If you don't reform, those people in government right now, if they don't reform, they're going to turn Trump into Caesar. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? Do you want a dictator? Because that's what you're going to get, because the people are going to demand that this all be solved and fixed. And, you look at what Doge is doing, and every day there's hundreds of billions in fraud and stuff of our money, of your money and my money that we've paid in taxes. And that's got to stop. And I think this is the most hopeful period I've ever been in. But then you see Cash and Dan Bongino telling us Epstein didn't, killed himself. And it's like, no, he didn't. Everybody knows that's a lie.
Right.
So the guy, I've always said, when this is all over, I talked to you about this. I haven't written a new book in a long time, because the one I want to write I'm going to call it Ancient Aliens and the Deep State. Right. But I don't know how it's going to end yet. So I can't write it because I don't know the ending. But, these guys are covering obviously for something. Now, maybe Epstein is in witness protection, so they have to say that he committed suicide. Maybe there's some benevolence behind it. But what's going to happen is, Ron, is if we don't embrace transparency and truth in government, these governments are going to cease to exist. And I don't think they understand that. They do not understand what's coming in terms of the human consciousness and the desire for change.
Well, I think the whole thing with Epstein is that anybody who's anybody, especially politics, have been compromised by this
Right.
guy in some way.
Right.
You know, that's why we have this whole thing going on in Congress right now where people are rubber stamping stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, is because I think that the entire, every single person sitting in one of those seats, somebody has something on them. And they're applying that leverage whenever they want
It is
to.
a theater. I think what's happening right now politically in the United States especially is all theatrical. I think most of these things have already been decided upon and agreed upon. And it's basically either you go along with this or we expose this about you.
Right.
Because now one side, you know, has all the information. And I've said this for years. When this all comes out, assuming it does, when this all comes out, the good guys are not going to be who you think they are, and the bad guys are not going to be who you think they are. You're going to be surprised who's on what side. You're going to be, I think, very surprised in the end.
So, Mike, you've been super busy, a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's really fun catching up.
Yeah.
And I know this conversation was all over the road, but I mean, you know, there's a lot of moving parts to this.
Right.
And you have to explore all different avenues to even make sense of any of it. So for anybody that's having trouble keeping up with the conversation or wondering why it's meandering all over the place, it was just a free-flowing conversation.
Yeah.
We didn't write questions. We didn't talk about what we were going to discuss. We just turned on the cameras and rolled.
And here we are, and we got to this amazing place. But it was a great conversation, and I found out a lot of things I didn't know. So that you know, doesn't happen all that often. So I'm glad that I get to hang out with you again and get some input into my brain. So I can use all
Mike
that.
Bara, this is my third studio you've been to.
All right, yeah, it's been a long time.
Yep, awesome.